I thank colleagues for a very topical discussion and optimistic yet realistic focus. Let's move on. For some, art is a way of entertainment, for others recreation, yet for others it is work. We will talk about art as a tool to draw attention to important themes: the environment, inclusiveness, human centricity.
Session is presented by the Teen Power Project. Teen Power by Rosatom is a platform that gives teenagers the floor and encourages them to speak out. It is a platform for communication and inspiration and a place to reboot. It has been created by teenagers for teenagers and is a chance for them to try their hand in the professional world. This session will be accompanied by a sign language interpreter. I would also like to say it is a great honor for me to introduce all the participants in this discussion. We have with us today Stass Shpanin, a painter and illustration artist and professor of art at the Department of Visual, Media, and Performing Arts at Rutgers University. Yekaterina Vorobei, a student of the British Higher School of Art and Design. Mark Dion, a conceptual artist from the USA, and Varya Yuschenko, a student of the British Higher School of Art and Design.
From Moscow, my name is Varya, and with me I have Katya, we both are design students from Moscow. And today with us from USA we have Stass and Mark. They're both visual artists, and we're going to have a little talk on ecology and art, and ecology and art. So I think we can start. So I think we can start with maybe Stass and Mark, you want to introduce yourself? Like maybe tell like 2 or 3 words about you. What do you do and so on.
Okay, I'll start if that's okay, Stass. So my name is Mark Dion. I'm a visual artist, and I work around issues of the culture of nature and the sort of history of natural history. I'm involved in a practice that is looking at maybe the history of ecology and the history of how as a collection of societies, we have treated the natural world. In a sense, I'm trying to look back and take a historical approach at understanding how we have evolved a suicidal relationship to the natural world. Okay, Stass, you.
Hello. Yes, I'm a visual artist as well. I work with histories and how we speculate the histories and how we develop new realities. And actually, in my newer work, I'm using artificial intelligence to fragment parts of the paintings and create new realities in that. And so that's what I do as an artist.
Yeah, okay, and just little words about us. I am Varya, as I said, and I study at Moscow in British Higher School of Art and Design on BA Illustration. And Katya?
My name is Katya Vorobei. I also study in British High School of Art and Design, but in first year. And in future I want to study in BA Illustration like Varya. And I think I love my university.
So I think we can begin with first question from me and Katya. So, in one of your interviews, we read that you, as you said, you explore like this suicidal relationship between people and nature, and you describe this as like really harmful for both of us. So, can you tell us about like some problems which we have to solve so our relationship with nature would again be like good? So which problems we have now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have, there are just so many problems. There's problems about thinking about the natural world. There are practical problems with how we're treating the planet. Obviously, global warming being the most obvious extreme problem that just threatens everything. So other issues that we have, whether that's protecting forests and coral reefs and environmental justice, all of those things are kind of are under the umbrella of global warming. So that's a huge problem which can only be solved on a global level. But I'm interested in thinking about where did these problems come from? How did it start that we began thinking about the natural world as something that was limitless and something that was ours to exploit to the point of depletion? So, that's really a big part of my focus. And an aspect of that, of course, is there are sort of several things that really exacerbate that situation. One, of course, is our history of colonialism, and the other is our history of capitalism, both of which have this kind of extraordinary disregard for natural systems and disregard for people who are perceived as not having power, who are perceived as merely a resource in themselves.
What do you think about role of art in changing the human perspective on nature? It is something education us, or it is only shocking people?
I think that art is different from conventional education, right? It's not something that you go to learn facts and figures. It's not something that has those kind of conventions of transferring mere information, right? We have ways of learning about things very specifically through science, through information, through journalism, and art really isn't that. Art is a much more complex way of communicating, and it's a way that is not necessarily about finding exact answers. Of course, there's protest art, which is very much just a kind of a form of propaganda, whether it's protest for something you like or protest against it. It's meant to speak in a very clear and unified way, and I think art is a much more complex thing. It maybe doesn't tell us details and factual information about how we're destroying the environment, for example, but what it might tell us is how we kind of feel about that, and how we and our relationship to that on a much more emotional, subjective way. And so, I think art is just one of many tools that we use to, in some sense, promote a progressive culture of nature, right? And it has a different toolbox than science, and it has a very different toolbox from, say, direct speech, journalism, things like that.
So,
yeah, and if I may add to this, Mark, actually, I also think actually museums are also changing in the way they also think about arts and science and environment, because in the past museums were obviously like those places where paintings and sculptures were stored, but now they're becoming these incubators where new ideas are being born, and almost like judgment-free zones where complex issues, as Mark was pointed, could be discussed. So yeah, I think we as an art, I think it's changing its role as well to better understand who we are and what we can do
I think
as artists.
Stass is exactly right about that. That museums are in some way some of the most trusted institutions. We've had the aggressive undermining of our institutions of higher learning, of our institutions of journalism, our institutions of really that represent how we know what we know. But museums have maintained a high percentage of fidelity and trust and respect from the public. So I think that it's a situation that museums understand very well, and it's a situation that artists can somehow use to their advantage in terms of having their voices heard.
Okay, so do you get clearly that you think that art is more about making people think about, not informing, but like encouraging them to think about the situation and maybe analyze it for themselves?
Yeah, I think art is very much kind of intellectual problem solving, right? When you come up to a work of art, whether that's a sculpture, painting, installation, or even a film, you have a very complex relationship to that. It's not exactly precise what this person is telling you, and you have to be engaged intellectually to put it in a context and really understand what it's saying. So it's a more sophisticated form of communication. It doesn't mean it's not a form of communication, but I think it's something that the viewer has to take time to unravel, and that's a very positive way of communicating, I think. It takes a while to engage with the work of art to really decipher.
What do you think about works of art which are like provocative, which try to make you think about the problem, but by like throwing you into it? Is it also like working?
I think it depends. I mean, I think there are some projects that are very provocative, and I'm not against art that really has something to say, that is didactic or that is provocative. I think that's really absolutely a place for that. But I think that provoking is again, it's a simpler way of engaging an audience, right? Where you really are expecting to have one kind of response, and maybe work that allows you to have multiple ways of looking at it, multiple responses, is a little more complex. And complexity is exactly what I think art has over direct communication form. I think provocation is definitely a tool to use, and it can be successful. And as I said, protest art and things like that, it speaks very clearly. I'm not saying that there's no place for that. There definitely is a place for that, but you have to think about the context. And if you want a very rich and complex reading, it's probably not going to be protest art, even if work that's made is sympathetic with specific political and environmental causes. Stass, you have something?
I don't know. Yeah, I was thinking, like, when you said provocative, and I was thinking about something that is like maybe not the first thing that comes when you talk about provocative in art, but still, like, I'm thinking about like work like The Bunny that's been done by Eduardo Katz, which basically that's what he says, and some of the scientists, that he took a gene from the jellyfish and inserted that in the DNA of a bunny, and then creating a bunny that would be lighting at night. But the question is, like, I think this, I'm not sure about what are your thoughts, I think this work is provocative and it opens, but it's complex at the same time because it opens a lot of questions that are ethical, related to the nature, questions that related to the legislative. I mean, there's like so many things that's being opened by this act, and so I think the role of art, as Mark, you were correctly saying, it's a lot more complex, and provocation is only one of the tools that we have in the toolbox.
And I think one of the strong things about art is also that it can not only be critical, but there's also a lot of ways to be critical, and one of those, of course, is also to be affirmative, right? When I go to a museum or when I see a work in public, you know, sometimes I feel very relieved because it's affirming my position. It makes me feel that I'm not entirely crazy because mostly what I hear is cacophony of positions maybe more on the extreme right. So to see something that's more complex than that maybe is more thoughtful and more socially engaged, is critical of the society in general in that it's affirming a progressive position.
Yeah. I have a question actually for Katya and Varya. How is your relationship to the topic? What are your thoughts on it?
Can you please repeat? The connection, I think, was lost for like a second.
Yeah, I'm asking what's your relationship to the topic of this provocation, arts and science and environment? Like, have you seen any work that really inspired you on the topic?
Honestly, speaking about me, I'm quite sensitive about visual images of problems and stuff. So speaking about what works on me and what encouraged me to think about the problem is a visual image of someone suffering or something happening. So I think such art as cinema, photography or performance stuff works the best, because you're just not only hear that something is wrong, but you see it with your own eyes. You start thinking. And I just believe that it's better to see the problem by your own eyes, and then you start to think about it.
I think, like, as you said, like, I don't know if you've heard of that phenomenon, survival of the cutest, right? Like, if we have the image of, like, a cute animal that's being almost extinct, then you would, you know, there would be a lot more chances for it to raise the money for it. But as, like, I'm thinking now about, like, Mark's work and his work that relates to the whole ecosystem, right? But the ecosystem to work, it's not just about one animal, it's about the whole complex,
yeah,
right,
I think
Mark?
so. And,
I don't know.
Also, I mean, I understand the power of images, but we also know by now how easy it is for images to be manipulated, right? And what we see, and how the networks that disseminate those images cannot be trusted in a sense. And you know, I mean, one of the things I think is positive about art is that there is, to some degree, it is a place that has some degree of fidelity and trust, largely because it's also tied to individuals as opposed to corporations and media outlets and other forms of special interest, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But sometimes I feel we're being influenced by that too, by the big corporations, although we try to be separate.
Actually, I think that you told about this stuff not being trusted. But I think that if you see a visual artwork, which is not like posted on the internet, but you know that it is an artwork and it was produced by someone and it is like in the museum, then you trust it. So.
Well, I'm not sure you trust it, because, you know, one of the interesting things about art is and one of the interesting things about the art museum is when you go to the art museum, it's not necessarily expected that you agree with the work of art, right? In fact, we encourage people who go to the art museum to think critically, to, you know, if they don't like a work of art, that's entirely acceptable. That's really like something that is okay in the experience. Whereas that's not true if you go to, say, a science museum or a museum of technology or history. You're expected to be a kind of passive consumer of information, right? You're not expected to argue with what you see. When you go to an art museum, you are kind of expected to argue, and it's okay. The art museum it presents a wide variety of positions, but it doesn't disrespect someone's ability to be critical and to reject what they're seeing as an artwork or as a good artwork, right?
So, Kat, is it okay for you to argue with an artist while you go to the museum? Just like look at the artwork and be not agreed with its creator?
I think it's okay because you and artists have different life experience, and it's great that you can analyze and critique it. It means that you have your own opinion, and also you can learn the world by this way.
I think what we're talking when we're discussing this issue, it's an issue of credibility. And whether, like society can believe us as artists. And I think as artists, we have an artistic license to manipulate certain things to create certain visual effects, to bring things that would not be possible. And there's a long history of that, actually. I'm thinking about artists like Jacques-Louis David, who was painting Napoleon crossing the Alps. And actually, when you look at this painting, it's there's like a glorious Napoleon on the white horse above the Alps. But if you read the history, actually he was on a donkey, and he was almost dying when he was actually crossing the Alps. He was very, very sick. Again, like art it's like one of the tools that we have. So my suggestion for you, Katya and Varya, never trust the artists.
It's actually the same our tutors try to tell us every day.
Yeah, but I think that that's our role, right? That's our job. We're not objective relators of information, right? We are putting in our own subjectivity and our position and our passions, and there's nothing in our job description that says we have to tell the truth. So the audience knows that when they come. One of the differences between art and science is that science is bound by a very particular formula, right? You have to do certain things. It has to be verifiable. You have to follow the scientific method. And if you go outside of that, it's not science anymore. Art has the almost exact opposite problem. Everything and anything can be art. So you can really do almost anything, and it still can signify as art. So so those questions of truth value and reliability are really not our questions. We have different questions.
Yeah, but sometimes I think that you might agree with me, Mark. We're using the credibility that science has, for example, or like photography has, right, to create statements that may not be true. So we might sometimes fake the credibility, so to speak, in our own use.
Yeah, I mean, that's just another aspect of artifice, right? Deception. But in the end,
exactly.
We are somehow. That doesn't mean that we're not ethical. We just have different ways of getting at discussing social ethics.
Okay, and now if we touch the topic of social ethics and stuff, speaking like not about art, but do you consider yourself as environmental activists, or is it like not what you do?
For me, I don't consider myself an activist, although I would say that my practice is allied to activism, right? I'm allied to environmental concerns. But I think, to me, activism is always something that's about having a measurable result, a measurable idea of what would be successful, that you're advocating for something and you get it or you don't. And I don't think it's very hard to speak about art in the same way as affectability, in terms of having like a measurable effect to your practice. That's kind of not how art works. It doesn't mean that I'm not interested in these issues and I don't support environmental activism. It's just I don't think that art making itself, even though it's an allied position, it's not an activist position for me. I mean, I know other artists who feel that that is activism, but to me, I think it kind of dilutes the term activism, and maybe it's even disrespectful to the people who are really on the front lines of social change to call art activism.
Yeah. If in terms of me, I also wouldn't consider myself an environmental activism, although I do support a lot of the goals that's they're being proclaimed by the activists working with the environment. Obviously, we have only one planet that we live in, and we have to take care of it. Things like recycling. This is like everyday norm that we do and we should be doing in order to be as efficient as possible to the nature. It's so that's kind of my perspective on that.
Yeah, I think that we have to strive to be more sustainable. Otherwise, we're just we're putting ourselves in peril, in danger, and future generations in danger. What are we going to say to future generations when we leave them no fish, when we have changed the weather patterns, when we've filled up the land with pollution? It's unacceptable to not be more sustainable. At the same time, we live in an extraordinarily conflicted society that really no longer even shares the same facts. So how to do that is really how to promote sustainability, how to promote a society that thinks in the long term is something really, it's certainly beyond my level of understanding what we can do. We have a kind of, we have a situation in which the institutions of information and the institutions that we relied on to tell the truth are no longer trusted, and there's also no longer a shared narrative of progress and justice. So where do we go from here? I'm not really sure.
Yeah. But I think on that, Mark, and answering away the question, I think education, I think that becomes one of the primary sources to solve the problem. I'm a really, really big believer that education can really help solve a lot of problems, and communication as well. So things like that, I think as more people are aware of the things that we need to change, as more people are in agreement, I think that's better for this kind of bigger goal. But I agree with you, Mark, that there is definitely like a crisis in trust that's happening right now, especially I would say like things that are related to politics. And unfortunately, there are certain things related to the bigger questions relating to the environment is almost impossible to solve without the political influence on the
Stass,
topic.
do you think about your teaching
in
that way as part of your practice as a good citizen, that it's part of the job to also be an educator?
Absolutely, and the thing is, I'm lucky in that sense that I love teaching. I love working with students, having communication, and it's something that I think, yes, part of my practice. Like I work with color, so I teach color studies class, for example, this semester. I know there is a certain importance of, I think, for example, there's been for a very long time. Let's put it this way, not a lot of women artists or artists of color in the United States. And of course, I do talk about these topics with my students and try to explain the paradigm that's been working before and how things are being changed and what role the new generation of artists and just as a human beings they have to take. So absolutely. How about you, Mark? Like when you teach, what's your?
I kind of feel like when I was a student, I was very much taken under the wings of my professors, and they saw in me something worth fostering and helping, and they were extraordinarily generous. So I always thought that was just part of the job, right, of being an artist, is that you help the next generation, you help them get a leg up, you explain to them how to do things with a little more ease, you introduce them into the culture of being an artist, right? That those are like really important things. And I teach right now at Columbia and a few other places, and honestly, I don't really do it for the money. I mean, it's not really something. I know a lot of artists that if they could stop teaching, if they made enough money from their studio work, they would immediately eliminate teaching. For me, it's not the same. I think I would probably teach even if I didn't get paid. It's just part of the. For me, it's like part of the job of what artists do.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. How about, I have a question for you, Katya and Varya, if you don't mind. So have you had like those mentors maybe for you that you thought was really showing you, because if I remember correctly, you were studying at the British Higher School of Art and Design. So maybe you could talk about your experience studying there and maybe some mentors and things that people who really changed your understanding of the arts culture.
Okay, guys, so do you want to start?
Okay, our tutors are very friendly, and of course it encourages us to grow professionally, to develop, and it's give us energy to study, to work, to have motivation, and of course it's help, because if you have around a lot of toxic people, it's not great at all.
Yeah, it's kind of when you get constructive critique a lot, but you never get a toxic one. It really helps you because you can see your failures and you can see your mistakes clearly, but you still don't feel bad. Because you feel sometimes, but it's not like about feeling like you're like a bad artist. You just understand that you failed. And it's like just an atmosphere that works, because you understand that all your mistakes, they are okay. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to try new things. And this is, I think, because of our tutors, because they created this atmosphere. And more personally about me, while I was studying at foundation, I still had I was lost. I didn't know what I'm going to do. But then when I graduated and started BA illustration, our first day started with our tutors just gave us a presentation on field of illustration. They just explained us what we can do, what is possible, what are the directions for our development, and they just showed us anything from the easiest ones to the hardest ones. And it was so inspiring because you get the picture of what is possible for you, and you just really get encouraged because you want to do this and you want to do that, and then you also want to do this. So it just gives you motivation to work. So I'm also very grateful to our tutors team because they just do anything for us to keep us motivated and inspired. So I think that the most working point here is showing the students their opportunities and just supporting them while they work. And this is what we get from our tutors. And I just love them.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're describing is like every educator's dream, right? That your students are excited, that you open new worlds to them, that they see that this is a culture that welcomes them, that they can, it's a place that they can imagine themselves making a contribution. I think that that's the ideal for, that's the ideal for an educator. That's when you feel it the most rewarding profession.
I'm glad that Varya managed to explain what is on my mind, but I want to add a bit about my own experience. When I started in theater, I was like a toy, and it's not great for me. But when I started studying in British High School of Art and Design, I could do everything that I wanted, and it is really great because not in every sphere I can do that.
Yeah, I totally, I completely sympathize with that. Just because, when I first went to school as well, I had no idea what was the landscape of cultural work. I didn't really know what was available, and really within the first year, my mind was expanded by very generous teachers who showed me all the possible variations of what one could do, and it was an extraordinary time for me.
Yeah. And I also, when I also teach art, one of the things that I show to students, the first thing actually that I showed in many of my classes is Marcel Duchamp's The Urinal, right? So showing that everything in art is possible. If that was happening like in the beginning of the 20th century, things was happening right now. Yeah, so I think I'm also very, very glad to hear that you have such teachers who, widen your understanding of the art world and what art could do.
Actually, we also started our fine arts semester with Duchamp, so I think it's like a common practice. But so yeah, it was very interesting to hear from you as like teachers and artists. But our time is over, I think. So it was really great talk. I enjoyed. Yeah,
that was quick.
It was so interesting to hear about like what you do and from the inside of your works. So yeah, thank you so much for this talk.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.